Coming up, is this the weirdest locomotive on the rails today? We'll examine what makes it a little different on the inside and out. Plus, look at some of the most modern diesels pulling freight in the 21st century and how they become so powerful and efficient. All that and maybe a surprise or two is next. CSX's Abbyville subdivision in Tucker, Georgia. Around here, a lot of the action happens at night. And sure, some of it is pretty routine. But sometimes you see and hear something a little bit out of the ordinary. Out of the darkness and into the light. One of the newest and strangest looking additions to the CSX roster. The front of this thing looks like an EMD, but it's actually more of a GE product now. That's right, there's actually a Wabtec 6-cylinder engine under the hood. Oh, and to avoid any confusion, keep in mind that GE Transportation is now a division of Wabtec. Now, to really understand what's been done here, we need to see one of these in the daylight. CSX designates this as an SD23T4, but Wabtec calls it an ET23DCM. And yeah, I know all these numbers and designations get confusing. As you've probably noticed by now, most of this thing looks like an EMD SD40-2, well, aside from the back end. This giant radiator housing helps the locomotive meet Tier 4 emission standards and contributes to the unit's unusual looks. According to an article posted on trains.com, other changes were also made to the unit, like shortening the hood for the smaller engine and adding a new control system. However, the article said the EMD alternator was kept. Okay, so if you didn't know, most freight locomotives have their engines under what's called the long hood. Of course, locomotives are essentially just rolling generators with a diesel engine producing power for electric traction motors that turn their wheels. This is an EMD SD45-2 that was built in 1974 with a 2-stroke turbocharged V20, and the engine produced 3,600 horsepower. This locomotive is on display at the Southeastern Railway Museum in Duluth, Georgia. Now, under the hood of this odd beast is an inline 6 producing more than 2,300 horsepower. Most of these are being put together at CSX's heavy repair shop in Huntington, West Virginia. While it does resemble its former self, this is a far cry from an EMD SD40-2. These were refurbished by Norfolk Southern, but still sound great pulling a heavy train uphill. Unlike the Wabtec creation we've been looking at, the original EMD SD40-2s had a 16-cylinder turbocharged 645 2-stroke diesel engine. And 645 refers to displacement. Here, that's cubic inches per cylinder. Now, the SD40-2 was one of EMD's best-selling models, and many are still on the rails today. Now, Locomotive division was once part of GM, but it's now owned by Progress Rail and called Locomotive Diesel. Anyway, some of these old SD40-2s are still pretty much original. Many have been refurbished, while others have been rebuilt to be more environmentally friendly. CSX rosters these SD40 E3s, but they still have an EMD prime mover, specifically a turbocharged EMD 710 V12. By now we know that steel wheels on steel rails is the most efficient way to move large quantities of freight over land, but what actually makes these new and rebuilt locomotives at the head end of those trains efficient and compliant with environmental regulations. Well, to begin with, in the 21st century, we've seen the radiator sections of locomotives from both GE and EMD increase greatly in size. Modern locomotives need greater cooling capacity to help reduce emissions. And believe it or not, the majority of the locomotives you'll see on the rails in North America are water-cooled. They don't use antifreeze. Both of the engines you see here meet the EPA's Tier 2 locomotive emission standards. The radiators on units meeting the EPA's Tier 4 standards are even bigger. This is an EMD SD70 ACE T4. It has an EMD 1010 4-stroke V12 diesel engine. That's right, EMD finally moved away from a 2-stroke engine and also increased displacement. As for GE, they have the ET44 AC. You know, it's truly amazing how much locomotives have grown over the years as builders try to maximize horsepower and efficiency. CSX designates this as an ET44AH. It was built in 2015. Behind that is an EMD GP9 from 1956. I mentioned earlier how popular the EMD SD40-2 was. Well, the GP9 was the best-selling EMD locomotive of all time. Meanwhile, this specially painted Canadian National locomotive is designated as an ET44AC and was built in 2019. Like CSX, CN also has its own special designations for its locomotives, which are different than what GE calls them. These things must have some serious cooling power back here. Anyway, modern General Electric locomotives now dominate the rails in North America. The company's Evolution series has been extremely popular. The first GEVO, as many of us call them, came on the scene in 2002. These units have 4-stroke, turbocharged, 4,400 horsepower V12s with a displacement of 950 cubic inches per cylinder. Now various iterations of the GEVO are commonly seen leading long-distance freight trains. Okay, so we've discussed cooling, but for years both GE Transportation and EMD have also used turbocharging as a way to get more power out of their engines and make them more efficient. Here, exhaust gases spin turbine blades to force combustion air into the engine to make more power. And to help control emissions, some modern locomotives use multiple turbos. In fact, the latest addition to Amtrak's diesel fleet, the Siemens Charger, uses a Cummins V16 with 4 turbochargers. Okay, so I'm not quite sure what's going on with the second locomotive in this big lash-up, but I do know turbos have issues every now and then and have to be well maintained. When throttling up, some locomotives, mostly older ones, can suffer from something called turbo lag when combustion air doesn't match fuel input. As for other approaches to meet emissions requirements, some locomotives and other machines using diesel engines also treat exhaust gases. Common methods include exhaust gas recirculation and selective catalytic reduction. The latter uses a fluid called DEF, or diesel exhaust fluid, which is commonly used in the trucking industry. So those are some of the ways that modern locomotives have become more efficient and environmentally friendly. And keep in mind, a lot of this technology wouldn't work without the help of microprocessors. While the hardware and software may be new, these days the trend seems to be to rehab, rebuild, or reactivate old locomotives, and this machine is definitely part of that trend. So far, I've only seen these on non-revenue trains. The one we saw at the beginning of this video was leading an empty rail train. I'd imagine the SD23 T4s will eventually be incorporated into yard service and short-distance locals. Now, I referenced some great books while researching this video, and you can find those in the description below. Anyway, that's it for now. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.